Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Politics and Prose bookstore. My name is Jasmine. I'm an event staffer here at Politics and Prose, where we host in-person events along with partnered and supported events, trips, and classes. We've recently relocated both of our branch locations at the Wharf and Union Market, and we started hosting events there as well. So to find a full list of everything, please go to our website, politics-prose.com. Before we get started, just a couple housekeeping notes. If you haven't already, just remember to silence your cell phones so as not to disrupt the event. And then when we get time to opening the floor to your questions, we've put a standing microphone over here by the white pillar. Because we're live streaming recording today, we ask that you come up to the microphone when you have a question. And following the Q&A, we'll have a book signing at the table right here. We're going to come around and ask for any personalizations you'd like in the book, and we'll flag that for the author to make things go a bit more smoothly. And then we also ask at the end of the event if you're able to fold up your chair and lean it against something sturdy for us to help us with the cleanup. All right, so without further ado, I'm excited to welcome Tara Campbell, celebrating the release of City of Dancing Gargoyles. In the parched, In the parched post-apocalyptic Western United States of the 22nd century, wolves float, bonfires sing, and devils gather to pray. Water and safety are elusive in this chaotic world of alchemical transformations, where history books bleed, dragons kiss, and gun-toting trees keep their own kind of peace. Among this menagerie of strange beasts, two sentient stone gargoyles pair up with two climate refugees, forming an uneasy alliance. In this strange, terrible new world, their arrival at an elusive city of dancing gargoyles could spark the destruction of everything they know. Tara Campbell summons fantastical magic in this kaleidoscopic new speculative climate fiction. Tara Campbell is an award-winning writer, teacher, Cambilio Fellow, fiction co-editor at Barrel House, and graduate of American University's MFA in Creative Writing. Her flash and speculative fiction stories have appeared in Master's Review, Wigleaf, Electric Literature, Craft Literacy, and Daily Science Fiction, among many others. She's the author of the eco-sci-fi novel Treevolution, two hybrid collections of poetry and prose, and two short story collections from feminist sci-fi publisher Aqueduct Press. Campbell will be in conversation with Amber Sparks, the author of an upcoming novel, Happy People Don't Live Here, and four collections of short fiction. Her fiction and essays have appeared in American Short Fiction, The Paris Review, Slate, Tin House, Granta, The Cut, and elsewhere. Please join me in welcoming to Politics and Prose Tara Campbell and Amber Sparks.
Hello, hello.
Ooh, hey guys. That was like very formal. I felt like I was coming out on the stage of a pageant or something. My goodness.
Oh my gosh.
Well, hi everybody. Thanks for coming. It's so quiet. It is. You guys are all so respectful. It's great. So I'm so excited to be here with Tara, who, I'm sure many of you know, moved away from us, but decided to come back for a reading, which was wonderful of her, and to be in conversation. So I feel like I bullied you into this, maybe. Hopefully not. Or maybe so for you guys.
I was gladly bullied.
Exactly. So I think what we'll do, if it's okay with you, Tara, is you'll read a little bit from your wonderful new book, and then we'll just talk.
All right. So you all have heard me talking endlessly about this book, but very few of you may have had an opportunity to read it. So I'm just going to read a section that serves as an introduction to four of the six main characters in the book. This is early on when the two climate refugees, it's a mother-daughter pair, first have their first encounter with two of the other characters who are sentient gargoyles. Remembering that it's not only climate change, but this secretive alchemical testing program that has caused the world to become the way it is in this novel. So this is chapter 4. Mama stands still for a long while, hand over her mouth. She doesn't like it when I interrupt her while she's thinking, so I hold her spear and wait for her to tell us what comes next. I'm thirsty, but I'm sure I'm just noticing it more now because she's worried about the canteen she just dropped. I'm glad it wasn't me who lost half our remaining water. What I want to say is, it's not your fault, or we've still got mine, but what I decide on is, was that really a dragon? She cuts me a brief sidelong look before turning her attention back to the barn. Use your head, girl. Wings, claws, serpent-like body, those teeth. I lift my sunglasses and squint, trying to get a better look at the creature or creatures messing around with our water inside the barn. I've never seen one up close is all, and I didn't know they talk. Plus, I could swear there's more than one animal in there. Mama's lips pressed tight. Dragons are different in different places. You know how they were, didn't care about the people who lived in the test sites. She's talking about the government again. Their secret weapons testing decades ago. Nothing has been the same since, she says, and I just have to imagine it because in my almost 18 years, this is the only way I've ever known it. I suppose it must have been pretty terrifying to have all the lizards around you turn into dragons from one year to the next, or to watch wolves float, or see statues sailing or whatever. She never talks about it. Well, let's just go then, I say. We don't have enough. She's right. Although our canteens distill moisture from the air, without both of them, we won't have enough water to reach Carson City. I lean the spear toward her, and she takes it from my hand. Then I unsheathe my dagger and take a deep breath in and out, clenching my teeth to keep steady. It's small, she says. If it breathes fire, we'll go. She holds the spear tip forward, and I stay one step behind her as we approach the barn, both of us slightly crouched, knees bent, ready to spring in any direction. I hold my breath. The only sound is the crinkle of scraggly weeds beneath our feet. The inside of the barn is rank and shadowy, but I'm close enough to the entrance to make out two distinct figures inside. They stop whatever they were doing to watch us. I halt, and Mama does too. One of the figures steps out of the barn into the light, a long gray serpent with 4 legs attached to a scaly body. It has a long snout with a forked tongue darting out from between rows of sharp-looking teeth. Even though it just moved, it looks like it's made of stone. Mama steps directly in front of me, forcing me to lean to the side to see the creature. It's standing in front of the barn, looking at us out of its bulbous round eyes. Its stance doesn't seem hostile. It's not crouched like we are, and its long pointy ears are swiveling like it's listening. We don't mean you any harm, it says, its voice rasping like gravel. It nudges our canteen with a leg, more to focus our attention on it than to move it any closer to us. This is yours. This isn't a question, but an acknowledgement of our need. Where are you going? It asks. I step out from behind Mama for a better look. I suppose the creature's wide-open eyes could mean wildness, but somehow they don't read that way to me. And she sticks her arm out in front of me as though that could protect me. Where are you traveling to? It asks again, louder. Its T's clack like tiny rock slides. I start to speak, but Mama pipes up. We're heading south. The second creature emerges from the barn, and we both shrink back from the lion-like beast striding on muscular legs, baring its teeth. It doesn't unfurl its wings, just raises and settles them slightly, as though to remind us it has them. It's made of the same gray stone. We saw you before, it said. Why are you lying? The 4-legged serpent looks down briefly. There's something calm about it. unlike the winged lion bristling next to it. "You're heading north," the snake thing says. Again, not a question. Mama takes a deep breath and a long time exhaling. "Yes." "There's water there?" Another deep breath. "Yes." The serpent's tail twitches. "We will travel with you," it says, looping its tail through the canteen strap. "We don't have enough water for 4, Mama argues. "Without this," the creature says, lifting the canteen, "you don't have enough water for 2. I can tell Mama's more pissed than scared. After all her planning to get us out of Oakland when it flooded, then out of LA after the big earthquake, then out of Joshua Tree while it burned, now we're stuck here, sun-baked, covered in grit, rationing protein bars, and staring down stone animals in a barn over our own water with only a spear and a dagger to defend ourselves. This was not the plan. But then what choice do we have?" Mama nods and, without a word, turns to head in the direction we've been traveling these past weeks. I lengthen a couple of steps to reach her side. Behind us, the crunch of footsteps, the sweep of a serpent's tail over gritty soil. I glance back, see the canteen swinging from the snake beast's neck, the flutter of the lion's wings against its flanks. Our steps settle into a sloughing rhythm as we head north to Carson City. Thank you. And those folks of a certain age will recognize this little fan I'll have assisting me every once in a while. This is my writer's assistant here.
No worries. So thank you for reading that. The whole book is great, and you guys are definitely going to want to get it. Of course you do. That's why you're here. So I have one very important question that I have to ask right at this outset here. Have you seen Gargoyles, the cartoon show from the 1980s?
You know, I do get asked that question a lot. In fact, I was assigned into a panel for a recent conference, and I actually asked to be taken off that panel because I know of the show, but I have yet to watch it. And so that is something that a little bit of cultural, perhaps cross messaging that I'm aware of. And those gargoyles are pretty buff.
Oh yeah.
So mine are a little wimpier than those, but so no competition between the two franchises.
Excellent. Well, you could definitely do a tie-in though. I mean, you should. I feel like you could use that. Nostalgia is really big right now for like all things 80s and 90s.
Yeah,
it might have actually been the early 90s.
I think it was the 90s. Yeah,
I think it was. Well, I watched that when I was a kid, so that was my first thought. Honestly,
absolutely.
Reading this book, I was like, oh, sweet! It's like a literary version of the.
Well, that was actually something that, when my publisher and I were going back and forth, I kind of said, well, this is something that's a departure from, the way we're usually used to seeing gargoyles as either these super scary, creepy creatures or this, sort of cartoonish thing. This is like gargoyles in a new way. So that was kind of my angle there.
It is not actually like the cartoon, just to be clear. But I did love that. Thank you.
All right. Fact checking, real-time fact checking here.
Yes, thank you.
It's important.
That is later than I thought too, which just makes time is liquid. It's weird. So how did you? Relatedly, how did you decide on gargoyles as 2 of your 4 main characters?
Well, that gets back to how did this whole book originate? Because this book has started as a series of writing exercises based on a novel writing critique by Michael Moorcock, who is a famous fantasy author, and he had this wild article on how to write a novel in 3 days, which is something I've never aspired to and something that would break me, I think. But I was just desperate for any sort of writing inspiration. So I took one of the ideas in this whole list And the idea was to work with deliberate paradoxes and come up with a series of images that fit in the world of your work. So when you're describing your world, you can just grab one of these images. And the example Michael Moorcock gave was in the city of screaming statues. And that image just stopped me in my tracks because I thought, what do they sound like? Are they screaming all the time, or does something trigger them? Are they screaming words or just sounds? Where are they? I had this instant image of like Charles Bridge in Prague in my head with these screaming statues, monstrous on both sides of the bridge. And so I thought, there's so much power in that one phrase. So, I thought, well, I'm not a novelist, so let me just break this exercise down. And I just sort of created this, like, in the city of verbing nouns exercise for myself. Printed out a list of nouns that fascinated me and verbs that fascinated me. Went old school, cut them up, put them in separate envelopes, and then each morning I would wake up and, pull one noun, one verb, and make it work. And if the things made sense together, like if I picked flying and dragons, I put one of them back because that makes too much sense. That's not a paradox. And so I had picked digging and gargoyles and started on a story. And I got as far as them digging because it's dry and because they're looking for water and their church has crumbled. And that's all I got. And I'm like, guys, you got to tell me what you're doing. Just, you're just digging. I mean, okay, we got that. I wrote that. Now what? And so I had to put them aside because they didn't have any other bright ideas. And so I kept writing stories. And as I would write stories, I'd, toggle back to the gargoyles and have them interact with these places. And that's how they became main characters, because it was such a shitty story that I needed more time to have them do anything interesting. So that's how they got the starring role, which I don't think that's life advice, but that's what happened in the book. So
I feel like that's often the case, though, with how books actually come into being. You're like, don't do that, what I just described.
Right.
But also it worked. So that actually answers several of my questions about how this fascinating book came into being. I'd love for you to say a little bit more about the structure, the way that you came, because you said, you came to this sort of noun and verbing thing, but then eventually it sort of obviously fell into cities, right?
Right.
So talk a little bit about how that came to be.
Yeah. Well, I kind of grabbed that verbiage from straight from the phrase. And which is odd for me as an author. I think it was a challenge for me because as an author, I usually start with dialogue, and then I move into conflict, and then character, and then the setting tends to be one of the last things I do. So in this instance, it was a challenge for me to imagine a city and then imagine the people who live there. And initially, these were all just going to be individual cities, and then I thought, well, maybe they could go into a collection. And then someone from one of my writing groups noticed a little footnote in one of the stories that mentioned alchemical testing and said, well, perhaps they could all be part of the same environment. So I went from, being an author that tends not to focus on setting and just kind of like piece by piece created these cities, not thinking they were going to be part of the same world. And then was, set with the challenge of making them part of a whole universe. And that's the point at which I turned to the map. And I turned to my gargoyles in their dusty place. And I thought, well, where's going to be dry? Southwest. And so I kind of plotted all the other cities in this. I have a Google map that, has all my saved cities. And so I have the gargoyles journey, and I have Mina's journey, and I have, the mother and daughter journey, and so they all have their own paths. And so, I wound up staying with that city, the initial city conceit, as a means of getting all these stories into the same world.
I love that. And just so you guys know, because you obviously haven't read the book yet, we've got the city of falling knives, the city of glaring chocolates, the city of sword-fighting robots, among many. So it was a city of paintbrushes, I believe. Drowning paintbrushes?
Yes, drowning paintbrushes, yes.
Which is wonderful. It's all this imagery is just so fantastic, and it seems like it must have been really fun to write this.
It was, and that's what really kept me going. This book began in sort of the midst of the COVID epidemic, the pandemic. And so I started writing these stories in 2021, basically as I'm not writing, so I need to make myself do something. But I got into them because it was just one tiny challenge, one manageable thing per day. And so I put everything I had into that one story. It just had to make sense within itself. And that's all the world could ask of me that day. So it was fun, but it was also an escape. And it was also a way back into writing and feeling like, myself again, and not just sort of like a hapless victim in this pandemic, So yes, multiple levels. It was definitely a saving impulse.
It's also interesting because, as you mentioned, I think this is your first novel.
Second
novel. But it's funny because you call yourself not.
I'm not a
novelist, despite having written a novel before. It's having working on novels and working on obviously your work sort of crosses many genres. I feel like you write poetry, you write flash fiction, you write short stories. And I'm curious, like, do you get bored? I say that as somebody who also kind of likes to write in a lot of genres. Is it, do you need the variety? And how do you feel like when you're actually working on a novel? Do you get bored, or are you like, I need to be doing something else as well? Like,
well, I never intentionally am working on a novel. That's the thing. I say I'm not a novelist. My first ever published book was a novel, but that was more me answering and asking more questions of myself based on one story I heard on WAMU, right here in DC. I heard a story about a group of French scientists who had created a device that could listen in on the circulatory system of trees and could tell whether or not they were getting enough water before there were any visible signs of distress. So before there's harm to the tree, before the leaves yellow, crisp up, fall off, they could tell whether the trees were, getting enough water. And so I thought the question, like the spark of the first book was, I wonder what else trees would be trying to tell us if we could understand them. So then I went and started doing all this research about, how we're already communicating with trees and how they're communicating amongst themselves and what we're doing to them and how we're manipulating them and how genetically manipulated trees are already out there in forests, like a lot of eucalyptus trees. And, we're using genetically modified trees to clean up our Superfund cleanup sites, making them like drink up all the nasty water we've left behind in industrial areas. And so I kind of got pissed off on behalf of the trees. And so I just, by doing this research and having these questions and imagining these what ifs, like what if we had to negotiate with the trees before they let us cut any of them down? And so that was where Treevolution came from. So I hadn't set out intending to write a novel. I'd set out with these questions and answers and then more questions. And then it became a novel. And I wound up writing up to the point that I thought I was going to start the novel with. I wound up writing kind of the origin story of the novel the book I thought I was going to write. And so with this, in a similar manner, it wound up being, my usual sort of flash stories. And, I was going to be doing a collection, and then suddenly I wasn't. But I think, in terms of what I'm writing at any one point, I have the privilege of deciding what shape the story is going to take and letting the story tell me. I know it sounds all woo-woo, but, the story will tell you what shape it wants to take. And I think the reason I am able to do that is because I kind of have, hustled to sort of find the, lit mags and publishers who can like take my weirdness. So I don't have to change what I'm writing to fit one sort of outlet. Just, it's the long game, as you know, sort of writing what really means a lot to you and knowing at some point there's going to be somebody out there with whom it resonates.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how I do it.
It's so true. And it's so true. And like every book is different, and every book needs its own thing, its own structure.
Right.
And sometimes you have to go find the structure for the book, and sometimes the book gives you the structure,
Absolutely.
which is always nice when the second one happens and you're like, thanks. That made it a lot easier.
That's the only way a book happens for me, really.
I definitely found with my novel it was very hard to find the structure for sure. But that is because I am definitely a short story writer in nature.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you said something, and now I'm trying to remember what you said because I wanted to follow up on it. Oh yes, you were talking about how you were angry on behalf of the trees. Now, I think a lot of your writing, it seems fair to say, is based, or comes out of, I should say, out of anger, out of political discontent, out of your frustration with the system, or, something that is happening, whether it's, women's bodies, whether it's and rights, whether it's the environment, whether it's our political system. And yet I feel like it never feels like propaganda. It never, your writing never, I never read it and feel like, oh, she just wants me to feel this very specific way, and she's, writing me towards that thing. It always feels like something magical and weird and bizarre and great, this, created world, which comes out of this source of anger and frustration at our world and the things that we are dealing with. So I'd love if you could say a little bit about if that's conscious for you, if you are like anger and frustration seem to be productive for you. Is that actually the case? Like,
yeah, it's interesting. We were just talking last night about the political nature of work, and to what extent should writers be political and bring that into their work, and so on and so forth. And I think for me, it all comes down to fairness. And because I was raised by a family and in a place where I could be raised in a way that felt fair to me, when I left Alaska to go to the lower 48 for college, I encountered other ways of being raised and other ways of looking at the world. And I was pissed off on behalf of a lot of people out there who had been raised differently, and who had been ascribed to certain gender roles, or who had been raised in like very strict religious backgrounds where they weren't given the liberty to sort of learn and grow, or had been sort of enmeshed in this racial hierarchy that I had not been enmeshed in the same way as a mixed race kid in Alaska. So I found myself with the world as I thought it was and seemed fair, and then encountering a whole range of people who did not benefit from that fairness. And so I think similarly to the trees, I start writing, because I'm pissed off on their account. And then I realized, I should be pissed off on my own account, actually, because of this, that, and the other. And so I think because I was raised without that anger and without that sort of explicit political training. And so I was allowed to be, I love those four words you use, like bizarre and weird and magical and wonderful. I feel like that's what my childhood was. I was allowed to be that kid without repercussions. And so I kind of want that for everybody else, and I'm pissed that not everybody else gets to be that way. And because of my wonderful, magical, weird, lovely husband back there in the back row, who is super supportive, I can continue to kind of behave like a child in many circumstances, and sort of keep that magical weirdness alive. But maybe in service to protest in a less direct way.
Well, speaking of weirdos, I love that. I'm all about literature keeping our childhoods alive in some way, as long as they were our idealized childhoods, right, I should say.
Right,
yes.
Absolutely.
So the book reminds me a little bit as well of Margaret Atwood's Oryx and Crake books. Have you read?
Oh my
them?
gosh!
Okay,
yes.
okay. Hoping that you had.
Yes, absolutely.
Not derivative of, obviously, but just kind of, I think, companion pieces in some a companion novel in some ways with those novels. And I almost think of it as this like post-apocalyptic wandering weirdos genre, which is, I love that you use the phrase weird, because that's exactly right. Weird in a good way, not in a like Donald
not
Trump,
the dark
J.D.
weird way,
Vance
but yeah.
to be clear. So I'm curious, like, do you like that genre? Do you have a favorite? And sort of how do you feel about writing post-apocalyptic lit in general right now? There's a lot of it happening, and I'm just curious about your...
Yeah, I didn't think that's what I was writing at the time. I didn't think of it as post-apocalyptic until, my publisher and I were like talking about, okay, how are we going to register this? What categories? And he said dystopian. I'm like, what? Hang on, I was just writing about, drunk butterflies and floating wolves and stuff. How is that dystopian? But it's like I write horror without realizing I'm writing horror. And then, oh yeah, I guess somebody's getting dismembered in that story. So I guess. So I wasn't really thinking in genre terms as I was writing it. And I am in love with Margaret Atwood. So anytime I'm compared even remotely to her work, I'm like, I'm not as serious as she is, but in terms of like blending genres, where she's doing literary and speculative at the same time. That's what I'm all about. And that's why I love the term speculative as a whole, as a umbrella term, because it gives us more freedom to sort of rejigger the pieces within. Dystopian has always been so dark for me, and I actually can't read a lot of it because I can't stomach it, because like I said, I'm a child, but I'm tender. I think invariably when you look into the future, there is darkness because we have messed a lot of shit up, and we're going to be facing the repercussions. But in the book, I purposely don't have a lot of gunplay. I don't have like the Mad Max, Humvees running around the desert. There is threat of violence, but I don't have on-screen violence unless, if trees shooting people is violence, then okay, there's violence. But, they got a little revenge there. But because I purposely was not writing that genre because it makes me sad. It drags me down. I want to be able to face the problems, but with a little bit of humor, because how else are we going to keep going? So any kind of writer who's like blending genres and weaving in and out is someone I'm into. I recently started describing my work as the love child of Margaret Atwood and Douglas Adams of Hitchhiker's Guide fame. I mean, that seems like an inane combination, but I think like that's okay. That's kind of what I'm doing here. So, yeah.
I can see that. Now I'm like thinking about a class that you could teach with those companion books.
It would be absolutely ludicrous.
Fantastic. Yeah. Someone should do that. A free idea for any professors out there. So this may or may not be true, but I feel like you are very prolific. You seem to produce a lot of work, and great work. So I'm curious, like, what is your writing practice like? I don't mean like, do you write every day and tell us all about that? But like, really, like you've described two different entry points into two different books for us, which are very different, right? Like one of them was, asking questions about something that you heard on the news. And then another one was, doing Michael Moorcock's writing exercises. So, is there a typical way for you to enter into writing? Like what does your daily or weekly writing practice like have a rhythm, or is it just, all over the place and whatever you find interesting?
Yeah, I think I'm kind of like creatively like a toddler, just kind of like bulldozing around the house, and then I'll get fascinated by something, and then I'm off to the races there. But I'm not incredibly disciplined like some folks. They create their outline, they have their word count, targets per day. That's not how I create. Craig could tell you there are days when I'm on my rhythm, he will come in and the lights in the rest of the house are off because I've been in the office all day. And, when he was like, before he was retired, retirement. But but he would come home from work and like the house would be dark and I may or may not have eaten. And now that he's home, he will like make me eat. He will bring me food, just to make sure I don't like keel over. But yeah, and then there are weeks when nothing happens. And it gets back to that sort of long-term view, knowing that it will come, and when it does, it will be like sort of, the floodgates opening, and just trusting it to happen. And because I've tried the other way, sitting down to write stuff, and that's when you get depressed about what you're doing and who you are and the universe and everything. So the nice thing about teaching as well as writing is you have another outlet. So if you're feeling blocked, you can do lesson planning. You can be creating new courses. You can be reading new stories to sort of fit them into your classes and taking notes on stories. And that's what really gets me inspired, actually, when I'm feeling like, I don't know what I'm doing. Why does anybody do this at all? I start reading other authors and they get me excited about what I'm doing. And then it makes it easier to get back to the page because it's the idea that gets me there. It's not, I want to write a story. It's like this idea I have questions about. So let me find out more about this.
I'm sure there are some folks out there who write full time, and I always think that's amazing. And then at the same time, I'm like, never, not for me, because same thing. I think if I had just had to sit with myself and my failure to do anything,
nightmare.
I would just be so depressed, and I couldn't go, well, you know what? At least I'm going to make a nice lesson plan, or at least I'm going to do, do something else. That's
Absolutely.
wonderful. So I do love that. So you are, in addition to being a writer, like speaking of, a teacher, a facilitator, a mentor, a literary community champion, I would say in many ways, part of the Barrel House community. If anybody has done anything with Barrel House, which I highly recommend, they have a great conference every year. Actually, 2 of them.
Yeah, I was just at one yesterday. Yes, yesterday I was just at one.
Yeah. And actually, I think this is how I believe that I met you.
Yep, absolutely.
I asked you. I didn't even know you, but I asked you to be on a panel because I had heard of your work and it was wonderful. And you were like, sure, and that was great. And I think that was a Barrel House conference.
It was a Barrel House conference, right?
Yeah.
And the weird thing about it was, like, I had seen you post that you were doing this panel, and we wound up on this panel together, and I'm like, holy shit, that's the Amber Sparks. I got her book at the last Barrel House conference, and I loved it. And it's like, these are the same person. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it's wonderful. I mean, they call it Conversations and Connections, and it's truth in advertising, because we did connect over that conference.
It really is. I actually know a lot of people who've made lifelong friends out of that conference. So I'm curious, if you can tell me a little bit about like literary community, which is obviously very important to you, and is it important to your writing practice? Is it important to sort of, the work that you're producing as well?
Yeah, it's important in terms of a sort of feeling like this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. So, not necessarily that, X conversation leads to Y story, but certainly feeling part of a community is basically, I'm not doing this to produce a product. I'm doing this because it's something I feel deeply about, and it's something I connect with other people over. And of course, writing groups being part of that community, it is producing, direct impact on your drafts. But, I mean, the ideal is to be in the kind of writing group that it doesn't matter whether you have work or not, you want to get together. And in fact, I'm going to be getting together with my writing group in person as we were before COVID at the same place we started in before we went online. And it just so happens that we're all going to be here on the same Saturday, so we're going to get to continue that connection. So that's going to be cool. And so that was really my biggest concern when we were moving to Seattle. We moved to Seattle last summer, and I was really kind of dragging my heels on it because I was going to miss this community. And just the feeling of any reading you go to, any event you go to, you're going to walk in there and see friendly faces and people you want to talk to. And so that's a wonderful feeling. No matter where you are in the city, you're going to see your people. And so that's something that, I thought, oh my God, I'm older and I'm a hermit and I don't want to talk to people anymore. So how am I going to make this happen in Seattle? But it's happening bit by bit. There's a group that I can walk to on Thursday mornings, and it's called Shut Up and Write, which is perfect for introvert writers.
Great.
So we just kind of check in, say, hey, my name is so-and-so, here's what I want to work on today. And then we shut up and write for an hour. And then afterwards we check in with each other. And so, and there are some reading series I've been able to get connected up with, and sort of some generative writing groups as well. So that was like the number one thing I did even before we left here, was to try and make some inroads, because that community is super important to me. And now I'm really, happy that I'm connected up with Hugo House, which is kind of the equivalent of the Writer Center out there, and Clarion West, which specializes in speculative fiction out there. And so I'll be able to, go out to Hedgebrook, which is a writing colony. In November, I'll be able to go out there on Whidbey Island through Clarion West, which is kind of funny to me that like I've applied to both programs and not gotten in, and yet now I'm going to be a facilitator at a joint program. So, it's
great.
again the long game, getting to know people. Like, one application process is not the totality of who you are as a writer, but once people get to know you and your work, and you put in the time, and you put yourself out there, and you are part of a community, there's always another way to get to where you want to go, as long as you're you're your authentic self, and you're doing it because you love it, and that's how I've been able to roll. So.
What a great, nice wrap up there, because I think we're just at question time. So that was perfect. Thank you. So I guess you guys get to ask questions now.
Yeah, there's a microphone up here by the white pillar.
Yes.
And I guess we're simulcasting, so hopefully people won't mind coming up to the mic here if you have any questions.
If you're really horrified about that process, like, we can repeat your question too. That's fine.
Yay!
Hello. Hey. Hi, Mark. Oh no, is it not on? I lied.
Does not appear to be on.
Is there? Yeah, there has to be a. Oh.
Huh. You know what? I can probably just give you.
I'm loud
mine.
enough. I have no problem with volume.
Right.
Question for both of you.
Yeah.
What are you working on as your next project?
Why did you have to ask that?
The best and worst question, right?
No, I will be completely honest, because I was like complaining to some of you out there. I am not working on anything right now. I have been working on, planning this trip and promotion and this and that and the other. And that's something that I've had a little anxiety about lately. And so I keep telling myself, okay, well, when we go back home, when we're done with this trip, that's when I'll launch into ... So I don't know yet, actually, what I'm working on. I think something that is always fun is to go back into my file of story starts, and the stuff that I abandoned is sometimes like, oh, that's really fun. Let me start working on that again. So I got it all organized into an unfinished stories folder on my computer. So I don't have the excuse then of reading through all the files now, because they're all in one place. So now I actually have to do something with them. So that's probably going to be my first project when I get home, is to go to the unfinished stories folder.
And I just finished final edits, actually, for my book that comes out next year.
Woo-hoo!
My first novel, my first published novel, I will say. Been many other junked novels. I'm also finishing up a short story collection that will come out the year after. And then, because that's not enough, I'm working on a novel, which I'm really mad about, actually. Because people kept saying, because I'm a short story writer, that's what I write, and people kept saying, after you write a novel, you're going to want to write another one. You're going to want to, and I was like, no, I do not. This has been the worst experience of my life. I've hated every second of it. I don't ever want to write another novel. And then, of course, I got an idea for another novel, and I was like, oh man, this sucks. They've pulled me in now, so. What else?
Oh, We have another questioner
hello.
here.
Is this on? Oh, it is.
it
Oh,
is.
okay. So hello, Tara. Nice to see you. So this just got pushed right past, and I feel like attention needs to be called to it. First, can you please approximate within 25 the number of short stories that you have published? And then talk a little bit about how you did that, because you've talked about your writing process, but I mean the grind of submissions and how do you generate the energy for submissions? But please start with the approximate number, because I think everyone needs to know if they haven't looked at your publications page. It's important information. It's insane.
I really have no idea. I couldn't even give you a ballpark because I just put it on the website.
It's hundreds.
Is it?
It's literally hundreds.
Is it?
I counted them like 2 years ago. It's at least 200.
Oh my gosh.
It's insane. Okay,
What's wrong with me? No.
Okay, don't forget the rest of the question, though.
Okay. Wow. Okay. Well, thank you. That's good to know. Trivia
had an
about
agenda.
Oh my goodness. No, I think it's part of this being a intellectual toddler in that way. Is I just do stuff. And because I write a lot of flash. Now, that's one thing that, is important to note. I write a lot of flash, so a lot of these stories are, 1,000 words or fewer. But the whole submission process, when I was really on my roll and I was like, I'm a writer now, I would write in the morning when I was still fresh, and then in the early afternoon, I would edit other stories that I had gotten feedback on. And then when I was starting to peter out, that's when I would be doing the search for potential markets. So Duotrope was my, lookup tool of choice, because you can track submissions there as well. And so I was, in my early days, I wanted to always be productive. So I had this kind of cascading energy level, workflow. And I was really aggressive out there, looking up new markets. And if I read a story I loved, I'm like, oh, I have a story kind of like that. And that's where they submitted it. So, and then I would look at people's site and where else have they submitted? And I encourage people to do that with my site now, because I have not cleaned shit on that site. So I have publications by year. And so I'll telescope them that way. But I mean, you can see every scrap of everything I've published ever. And it's probably not the most professional way, but it's good for me to know, oh, when was the last time I submitted to X market? I can just look it up on my website. So yeah, that was in my, when I was just starting out and I was all kind of, rambunctious and ready to go. And so I did a lot of research, and now I've kind of let off that gas a little bit. Partially, working on larger projects like this book and then the publicity and so on and so forth. And partially because I don't know, I feel like, okay, I've got that sort of publication thing out of my system, and now let me work on some longer stories and let me have some new goals. I think one thing I do want to do is I'm just in awe of these, folks that have these, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 word stories. And I'm like, I never write that long. For a while, my sweet spot was it was always 1,200 words. I'm like, where the hell am I going to send this? But yeah, I really want to work on the complexity and sort of spend more time on each story. I think that's my upcoming goal. So yeah, that's kind of how I think I answered all the parts of the question. But what about you? What has been your flow in terms of publishing, and have you gone through that sort of transition or any kind of shifts in your thinking about that?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I think like you, I was also a flash fiction writer and published a lot, especially because it was it was the heyday of internet publishing, right? Internet magazines. There's still a lot of really great stuff out there, but it was things were just opening up for the first time, and it was this sort of glut of things. And so I did actually publish a lot, and which was great because it really opens up doors. You meet people, you meet publishers, you meet presses, and you collect enough stuff to put out a collection, which is great. Especially if you don't have other publications. But I think, part of it is I've just gotten really lazy as I've gotten older. I'm like, oh, I wrote this story. I'll I'll put it in a book because I don't want to go through the work of like having to find, and because some of the excitement I think wears off a little bit, like you said. You're kind of chasing that high for a long time, and once you've published enough stuff, you're kind of like, okay, well, now I would really rather like focus on the writing and spend my time doing that. And also life just gets really busy, as for me especially. Like I feel like as I've gotten older and I have a kid and full-time job and teaching, so it's just a lot, and I just don't have time. So I have been focusing more on, like you, on larger projects and on full-length books. Yeah,
I'm too busy having hot flashes to work on.
So. I'm not there yet, but I'm not that far off either.
Yes.
Hi, Tara. Great to see you. My question is, how did you choose the narration point of view for this book? How did you decide on first person? Is that your preferred way of doing it? And how did you decide on the daughter?
Yeah, I first person. I tend to start writing in first person, and I've noticed that recently. I'm like, I gotta, let me go ahead and do something else. But I think for me, it's that immediacy, and I may change a POV later on for some variety. But for me, it's my way of like working into the project or the idea, and working through the ideas. Sort of, the home base is like, how would I react to this? And then I kind of move outward from, okay, well, not every character is me, so let me add some variation. But I do wind up staying in first person quite often. And I think it's just because, part of my thing was I always kind of want to have enough room for readers to be able to imagine themselves in a character and imagine themselves in the situations. And I find that first-person narrators can offer that because you're not necessarily describing the person or situating them in a very, like a very specific mindset. Because, when you're saying you're not sort of like having them look in the mirror all the time, right, to describe exactly who they are. And so people can sort of use their own imaginations and get closer to a character that way, which I feel kind of like a hypocrite saying that because, when I'm teaching, a lot of my students will have these characters that they don't want to define very specifically because they want it to be this kind of, I want my character to be accessible, but so the trick as a writer is to discover how specific can you be while not shutting out, potential readers or people. And I'll just, as a mixed race reader, it's always been tricky because, like, if I want to write a black character, well, what the hell does that mean? Because my way of being black is different from someone else's way of being black. And how important is it for me for this character to be recognized as black by the reader, which gets back to this mother-daughter pair because they're brown, they're characters of color, but I'm not specific about that because for me it's like, okay, well, to what extent does a characteristic affect the experience that I'm having? So there is a section in there where they're talking about guns, and they're like, well, if we walk around with a gun, it's a different thing, and they refer to their skin color. And so that's a situation in which, a racial characteristic does make a difference. And so that's when I bring it into a story. But if it doesn't, I tend to leave it out. And so that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I usually start with and I usually just sort of report on a character in as much as it affects their experience of the world.
Hello, Tara. Hello. As Tara knows, I've started the book, and as I expressed, I'm not reading it, I am savoring it. So I still haven't finished it. But I feel like I'm reading poetry in that everything seems to be an allegory. Each chapter, and I've identified many of them in my mind, but some of them I couldn't. Is each one an actual, should I be still searching?
Thank you for that question. Some of them are allegories, but as Amber said, it's not necessarily a one-to-one correlation, like I am trying to teach you this lesson. There was one I know that was when it was published as a short story. It was The City of Sneaking Needles. And I thought I was making kind of a pointed reference to gun violence because I was talking about these needles that sneak up on you and stick you when you're at home or at school or in bed or at the movies or whatever. And, not everyone got that reference, which was fine. That was fine by me because it was as direct as I wanted to be. So there are stories out there that will seem like allegories and they'll connect. And then other stories are more just sort of a mood. There's a story about a family that's the sword fighting robots. Features a family, the Husk Corporation family, that has erected a compound, and they've created these sword fighting robots to protect the compound. And that's pretty direct. But there are other things that are less direct. And I find in my own reading, I kind of like being perplexed sometimes, like having some touchstones that are firm and then having other things to wonder about even after I've finished reading the book and to contemplate. And this is one of the reasons I love Amber's work, because she's so good at that. Like there are certain things that, okay, this is what I know. This is what I don't know, but it's okay not knowing what I don't know because that leaves me something to think about. And it's like this, the afterglow of the story, I think. So that's something I've been working on. And like, when I mentioned working on the complexity of my stories, I just want to get weirder.
Thank you. I'm so glad. Everyone should want to get weirder. I hope you never write an unweird story. Anybody else have a question? We have like a couple more minutes if you need. No? All right. Do you have anything else you want to leave us with?
I just want to thank everyone for coming out and thank you to Politics and Prose for hosting me. I actually used to work here. I worked at offsite events.
Really?
Yes, I spent, I think it was about a year or maybe a year and a half, hauling books in the sweltering heat and like pulling dollies full of books in the rain to get to venues with stairs. But no, it was a lot of fun. I got to see
the romance of
bookstore work. The romance of book sales. If you can, get a job in the store. But yeah, so thank you to Politics and Prose. And actually, my MFA program does their graduation reading here at American University. Mm-hmm. So this is a special place to me. So thank you so much for hosting me.
Thank you, Tara. Thank you, Amber. Please be sure to find the book.